You are listening to the sounds of the Right On Network.
Hello and welcome back. This is episode 5 of 30 Minutes to Get Back, a podcast where we cover Peter Jackson's docuseries Get Back 30 Minutes at a Time. My name is Chris, and as always, I'm joined by AJ. And AJ, how are you doing tonight, buddy or pal or chief?
Yeah, call me old pal.
Old pal. I like that. Okay.
Yeah. So, Chris and everyone that's listening, thank you for listening. I'm happy to be here, and it's fun to be able to talk Beatle talk because, surprisingly enough, I don't get to do that as often as I would like to. So, I find this podcast to be a real treat for myself, selfishly.
That's, you know what? Same here. Same here. I don't really have a lot of, when I try talking Beatles to my wife, she kind of tunes me out. So this is a nice little vacation away, I guess, to be able to talk Beatles with you.
All right.
So this half hour that we're going to cover is pretty interesting to me because I felt like there was a thread that, I picked up where it feels like this episode is the Beatles versus Authority. That Authority shows up in a couple of different forms in this episode or in these 30 minutes. Which, I thought was very interesting. And I don't know if you picked up on that or if that's something that makes a lot of sense where there are these different areas where they're sort of fighting the political authority and business authority and maybe even authority in the band. And it seemed to run through this whole half hour.
Yeah, there's certain things that happen in this 30 minutes where I wouldn't say it was magical, but I think it's beautiful as far as them coming up with a song and it's kind of like it doesn't have a soul or a spirit yet. And then events happen in the real world and it gives this song a whole different definition. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Well, we pick up right kind of where we left off. Last episode, we were in the middle of date 6. And George starts introducing For You Blue. And that song, when I was listening to it, it really reinforces the band's idea behind the project of getting back to basics because it's kind of like a blues skiffle song. And I guess they were a skiffle band when they were teenagers in Liverpool. So it's not really fancy, right? It's just kind of like a playful blues song. And I know you love the song, right? That's one of your favorites.
I love it. Yes, and I can't wait till they get in the studio and really hammer this thing out. But yeah, I love the song.
I think it's a great moment. I really like watching George create and bring his songs. It's just something for me personally. Watching it, it's very endearing to me.
And who is it? Carl Perkins?
Carl Perkins.
I know that that's a big influence on George and like how he approached like songwriting and guitar solos because he's name dropped a lot in Beatle books that I read. So all of that and like you were saying, their old days.
Now, after George plays the song, everybody in the room starts talking politics, and I feel like this is the first time politics really creeps into this movie, this documentary, because they're joking and they start improvising different songs, even kind of using Get Back to try and make a statement about immigration in Britain at the time. And it kind of connects to a big cultural moment that was happening in the UK. There was a person who used to be a member of Parliament, Enoch Powell, and he had a speech called Rivers of Blood, and it was a really controversial, inflammatory speech warning about immigration, and it made this wave of nationalism and anti-immigrant sentiment kind of bubble up in the UK. And you can even see it from the newspaper headlines that not only did they have in the studio, but also that they were flashing on the screen. They were giving us a lot of context about it. And I'll tell you, just reflecting on like politics today, really, the more things change, the more things stay the same. But how did you feel about this kind of injection of real politics into the Beatles?
So what's interesting about that is, okay, so And then they also talk about a Wilson guy as well in this.
Yes, I believe. Yeah, I
That
believe they mentioned. Yeah.
So I wonder if that's the same guy from Taxman with the aha, Mr. Wilson, aha, Mr.
Hmm.
Heath. Is that the same politician? What's interesting about this is, okay, so, and this is very tricky. It's almost like in America where you have All in the Family, and when you miss the meeting and you're like, yeah, I'm rooting for Archie Bunker and what he's saying before he gets the egg on his face stuff. So it's like, oh, I missed the message, right?
Right. Right.
So what's interesting about this is the guy is saying, get back, like get back to where you belong. Immigrants, get out of this country.
Hmm.
But the Beatles, they're taking that and using it in a different way. But that's kind of tricky because that could get lost in the message. Now, what's interesting is I was probably a young adult when I first heard this song. So it's like, all right, if I would have known about this, because I knew all about what was going on in the news and they wrote this song, like I found out about that. But it's kind of like, hey, there was this anti-immigrant sentiment going on and the Beatles were fighting against that. And as a young person, even if I heard this as a teenager, I would go, well, of course they would be on the other side of that argument in 1990s, early 2000s. But if I'm 13 years old in 2025, if I'm 23 years old in the year 2000, I wouldn't be so of course about that. I'd be like, oh, they're an English band. They don't want to keep Britain for Britain. Like, they don't want to Brexit. They don't want to keep everything just British owned. Oh, they were against anti-immigration laws? Huh, that's interesting. I wouldn't be so of course that they landed on the side that they did.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because depending on when and where you hear it, the year and your age and the world around you, that makes a lot of sense. And the Beatles,
Because where is Eric Clapton from?
he's from I don't know where in England, but he's English, right?
Because I know like he like in the 80s or 90s or something, he was saying like some kind of anti-immigrant stuff. So I wonder if it's because the Beatles are from the North, so they're more like they have a different way of maybe people from London. I don't know.
It could be because
But
I know I've read and I've seen that like classism in Great Britain and in the UK
yes,
is really big.
it's
So if
huge.
you are considered from, a lower class, they basically lumped you in with the immigrants almost. It was like you weren't, it's like what they used to call the Irish was, the white N-words because they saw them on that level that if you were a different class, you were like a different ethnicity almost. So the Beatles could have been on the receiving end of that as teenagers. I mean, none of them, I don't think, grew up wealthy or well off.
No, they're working class guys. That's why even in the movie Hard Day's Night, there's this kind of montage of Ringo kind of wandering by himself and all this stuff, and a cop kind of confronts him, and Ringo says "Southerner" as a direct, like like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
against you because I know you look down on me, like, and I didn't even pick up as a kid when I was reading Andy Cap that Andy Cap was from the North, and that was like kind of like we're gonna in the American South we're going to depict them as not as
Hmm.
smart, right? Like in cartoons and stuff.
Hmm.
I didn't realize like, oh, what I was reading here was probably like problematic of how you're depicting a group of people from a regional area. I may have no basis on what I'm talking about. I shouldn't be speaking on this, but I just wanted to say like, I think I took for granted that, hey, the Beatles are on this side of that argument. And I thought, well, of course, but that could have been a not of course.
Yeah, especially
So
like you said when you mentioned people like Clapton, who at least now seem to be on the other side. So it's not like every musical artist in the 60s were on the left of a political issue, which is kind of like today.
correct.
Sometimes artists, you know, get hounded for their political opinions and they're not always on the same side. But looking back, you would think, well, it's the 60s. Weren't they all kind of progressive hippies? But you don't know.
Not so
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
You know, and
Ask Mick
and the
Jagger.
interesting thing too is usually when the Beatles do get political, it's a little almost vague or it's abstract. Because I know I've read that Blackbird is supposed to be about civil rights, and Come Together is
Correct.
kind of a political song, but it uses a lot of imagery rather than direct statements. And even
Which is
Revolution
wonderful.
is kind of political, but that's more like about personal choice. And what they do in the
And
studio,
also,
I'm sorry, with Commonwealth, the song that they're singing, it's not subtle at all. It's very direct with what they're saying. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
no, I was cutting you off. I think also we have to keep in mind that the Beatles, just by not changing their Liverpoolian accent, that's
Yeah.
politics. Like, that's political. They said back then, if you made it worldwide, most people, if they made it worldwide, they would speak standard British, like, you're going to speak the Queen's English.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they didn't change their accents to fit the RP, that was revolutionary. That was political itself. Like, they talked about, like, remember John Lennon at Albert Hall? He said, the people in the back, clap your hands. The people in the front, rattle your joy.
Right.
This band just itself, like, they talked about, like, when they were being interviewed worldwide, they said, like, hey, the Queen, they didn't even know people like us, like how we behave, how we react to stuff, how we talk, existed.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just them being them is political.
Yeah.
But we'll keep going.
No, that's a great point because, and you know what makes that even sharper is when they do sing a song like what they're doing with this Commonwealth song, they are singing it in a more pronounced accent than they would if they were singing I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Correct.
So they're pushing what you're talking about in this song, and they're calling out this guy by name, Enoch. What did I say his name was?
But yeah, like you're saying, they're being very
They're being
direct.
Powell. That was it. Yeah, they're being very direct. They're calling him out by name. They're almost playing like a back and forth between John and Paul. And it's amazing to watch because it really could be one of the most direct political moments we get to see from the Beatles on film. Because everything else is so subtle or abstract. And when you hear them like this, is that something that, you were talking about it before, but is that something that you were like, okay, I always knew this about them, or getting to see this from these guys kind of surprised you in any way at all?
No, it didn't surprise me in any way. Now, what's interesting is you got to remember, we're seeing the rough drafts. So even if it went to print and they were more like metaphorical about it and abstract, I wonder if, but what they're recording in this studio, remember, because they were going to show like, okay, here is a video or a TV show of them making the music. Okay, now here is an episode of them performing. Would that part about them talking about Enoch Powell and all this, would that have aired back in 1969? Who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point too.
And also, you got to remember too, it's 4 members in this band. So like John and Paul, they might be cool with this, but George Harrison might be like, I don't know, guys, or Ringo. But it seemed like they were all like, no, this is great. Mm-hmm. And then you got to remember, we have Linda, where I like when Paul goes, Linda's a cameraman too.
Right, yeah.
But she's there. And what if she is like, whoa, wait, what are you guys talking about? Oh, I don't want to be involved in this. Like, I have a professional career. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen. And we haven't talked about this yet, but I just want to put on the record, Yoko is at these sessions.
Oh, yeah. She's a constant participant. Constant.
And what's hilarious about it is she's sitting right next to John, and Paul is like talking to John, and it's almost like, I've already, when it's like, I'm uncomfortable that these cameras are here, and now they've been here for so long, I'm used to it. And it's like the same thing with Yoko. Like, she's not saying anything, she's just there, but I just kind of used to it. She's just background noise or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, they definitely. You haven't caught any moment yet, at least, where anybody is saying they have a problem with her being there. And to be honest, the whole place is full of people that aren't directly
Yeah,
making music or involved with film, that are just kind of there. I mean, some of them work for the Beatles or are helping out with in other ways, but it's not like it's just the four of them sitting in a room writing songs and then Yoko comes in. It's a packed house.
I think what the Beatles, when they first started, they were always known for "It's just us in here."
Mm-hmm.
And then when they wanted to record, when George went and got Eric Clapton to have everyone behave and like, will you help us with "While My Guitar Gently Weeps," that broke the mold. And now, John's been bringing Yoko Ono, and then that's when Paul McCartney was like, okay, well, I'm going to bring Linda Eastman. Watch this.
Yeah. And then the funny thing is, I think there's a moment in this half hour where like Linda taps Yoko on the shoulder and they walk away together, like, oh, hey, the food's here. Like there's a moment where, so there's obviously some camaraderie going on. This isn't like, it just doesn't feel off putting like what we're told that, oh, Yoko comes in and the band is now angry about it and she broke up the Beatles. It feels like it's just, oh yeah, John's girl is here. There's no, it just feels like it's normal. It doesn't feel like it's causing a problem right now.
And I think also, I think a narrative that I never thought about until like 5-10 years ago, I think Yoko is there to make sure John shows up.
That is a pretty good point because I'm pretty sure if not at this time, he's probably still dealing with some drug issues. I know that.
The smack.
Yeah, I know he has that song "Cold Turkey" that he writes maybe in another year about trying to get out of it. But yeah, that's a good point because he is the last one to show up almost every day.
I like the joke where he says, "I'm in my continuity clothes."
Right? Yeah, I know.
That is hilarious.
He was like, he's wearing the same thing, and they make a conversation because they said like it's going to look like we change our clothes every 10 minutes when they cut this together.
Yes.
That's great. It's a great moment.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So now after they do this political song, it seems like the room's energized because they start, diving into some covers, right? They do Honey Hush, they do House of the Rising Sun. George does this really beautiful version of Mama, You've Been on My Mind. And the whole vibe seems to change, right? The Bob Dylan song. And it just feels kind of loose. And it's almost like I got this feeling, we were talking about it, that this kind of really in-your-face rebellion that they did earlier kind of brought out those scrappy Liverpudlians, that they took a shot at, the man, and now they're going to play some rock and roll. And it's almost like that moment, they weren't the biggest band in the world trying to film themselves making this album. They were just a rebellious rock band again for a little while. And yeah, and I wonder if, if doing those old songs and getting that skiffle, the skiffle roots, and then doing a protest song just kind of like really gave them a lot of momentum, I felt like.
Yeah, they were having a lot of fun, energized. You would have never thought, like, man, they're having issues within.
And then we get to another one of those kind of magic moments that really remind you why this documentary is so special. Paul sits down at the piano and he starts working through Let It Be. Everybody else is sort of involved. John's playing bass. Glyn Johns, I think it's Glyn Johns is there. He's helping kind of guide, almost like he's producing the song by helping them figure out when certain parts are supposed to come in, and they're all attentive. And watching it come together in real time is kind of incredible because these sessions can feel a little disjointed at times, but moments of this kind of remind me that we're watching the birth of classic songs.
when Paul performs Let It Be, those opening moments where it's like, when I find myself in trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, they cut to John and George like listening, and it's almost like this song is transmitting them back to when they were teenagers or whatever. And like they're all having this psychic link of like, oh my gosh, like, can you believe we've come this far? It's like they all kind of get that, and they're transfixed. It's like Paul McCartney is like summoning like a teacher they had, and it was like, oh, we would always mess around, but when this teacher got onto us, we were just good little boys, and they look like that, and it's pretty endearing.
It always reminds, it reminded me what you were just talking about of like what Brian Epstein had said, or George Martin said rather, during the recordings, I think, of Sgt. Pepper's. He said, the boys would sneak away and smoke, the pot on the roof or something and then come down. And he said, we never had a problem with it, but they needed that feeling of they're sneaking away from the boss to do something naughty.
Gotcha, yeah.
And it's almost like that's what energizes them, that feeling like they're this rebellious band, and kind of continues because now we enter day 7 and the morning starts and Dick James is there. And for anybody who doesn't know, Dick James was with Brian Epstein. They helped set up the Beatles publishing company, Northern Songs. And at this point, he's still kind of a friendly figure around the band. But as we know, pretty soon, he's going to sell his stake in Northern Songs without consulting the band. And that kind of leads to the Beatles losing control of their catalog. So kind of watching him in the studio now, I felt tension. And I felt like the boys were not really interested in him talking to them about publishing and money. They were just flipping through these pages, kind of like, oh, look at this song. Oh, this one. Oh, we own this. And they were just finding funny names of songs while he's trying to explain to them how they can monetize it. It just felt like it almost felt like, that rebellion again. This time it's a quieter version because they're rebelling kind of against the business. And it felt awkward to me. I don't know if that was something you picked up on too, or if it's just my imagination.
No, not at all. And remember George Harrison writing that Only a Northern Song, where like, hey, I'm singing out of tune and all this stuff. It doesn't matter. It's only a Northern song. What I picked up on that especially is we're seeing them go through all these pitfalls that happen to them later as far as like owning their publishing and how they can get it back, where artists after that can see this and then they could be more business savvy. Because we've seen all the VH1 behind the music and all this stuff. So now these artists are more savvy with, okay, I'm not going to go open door number 2. I'm not going to open door number 3 because I've seen that before. Right. So yeah, like you're saying, they're being artists and not putting their business hat on.
I had read that Paul, after this whole fiasco with James, that he's very conscious of songwrites. And I read that when he first started making music with Michael Jackson, he hammered that into Michael Jackson's head, that he was very forceful with him that you gotta own your songs and you've got to own this. And I feel like there was a time where when Michael Jackson bought the Beatles music, right? The catalog.
Publishing.
I feel like I remember he called Paul to let him know, like, they don't own it anymore. Because I don't think Paul had a chance to buy the songs back at the time. I think now there's some sort of deal. But I remember reading something along those lines where this left such a lasting impression that almost 20 years later, when he's writing, or recording songs with Michael Jackson, he's still talking about it.
And I think that had that fallout when Michael Jackson outbid and bought those publishing rights.
Yeah.
And Paul's going to be one of the first ones to go and get his own management.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
And this is going to lead to the woes.
Yeah, and that's when that's one of the big, fallouts that the band has, right? Because they can't agree on a manager.
That is correct.
And then, what's interesting about this is their rebellion against Dick James is very different, where they're yelling almost and calling um, Powell by name. Here, it's almost like a passive aggressive rebellion. And even to the point where there's a moment where he's on stage or in the area where they're playing, trying to talk to them about something, and they just start playing their music. And it's almost like they're chasing him off with their music, like, please go away, without really saying anything. And I found that very interesting because it's almost like they're in that, he's part of the system that they're inside. So their rebellion against him is very different than rebelling against a politician on the outside.
That is correct. Yeah, it's almost like, okay, now Mom, walk away.
Right. Yeah.
Leave my room. I never did that, but the kids.
Yeah.
Said,
yeah.
Leave my
That's
room
what it
now,
felt
please.
like. Like, I'm turning my music up. I'm done listening to you. So the other thing that I noticed, because I feel like the half hour that we're watching ends kind of on a quieter moment, and what stood out to me, because John and Paul, they're working through Get Back, and they're doing Two of Us, and I felt the camera linger on George, and maybe it's hindsight because we know how the story unfolds, but he looks isolated from them, and John and Paul are still operating as the central songwriting engine of the band. And George almost looks like he's watching them from the sidelines. And it kind of hints that almost George himself is sort of rebelling against the authority inside the Beatles. And that's why we see the friction between him and Paul a lot. And I'm just curious if you picked up on anything like that, or if you have any thoughts on George, on why the camera would really show us George while John and Paul are trying to work out their song.
It's very interesting because Peter Jackson, he wasn't there to shoot this stuff. So the people that were originally there, you would think that this would be a pro Beatles narrative, but the people at the time shooting this picked up on, hey, he's the third wheel of this songwriting team. So I picked up on that the first time I watched it, where it was like, oh, they're catching the moment when George is about to walk out on the band. And we have Peter Jackson that picks up on that and tells that narrative of it's the Paul and John show, and George Harrison's songs, they're not working on it as much as theirs. And you see George going like, well, look, again, when I was in America, I was the guy, and now I got to show up and be the younger brother. Now I'm out of here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it looks like he's almost zoned out of what's going on, because, and of course he could just have resting zoned out face, but it does feel like there's a moment there.
The camera picked up on
Yeah,
it.
the camera picked up on it. And it just seems like there's a moment there where you can see the split between the three of them, because George just wants to put his songs down, even so much that the songs that he's brought, which you and I both love, are songs that it's almost like he's apprehensive to bring to the band, because he feels like they're going to want to toss him to the side because he only gets 2 or 3 songs an album.
And you know how hard it is to shake, where it's like, okay, well, we treated you like this when you were 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. Now we're older. From the outside, people can tell, like, wow, you're a really good songwriter. But we're still looking at you like, no, we're running the group. And you're like, all right, George, give us a song or two. Not realizing, like, no, this guy's about to be very prolific. So they just can't see it because they're within the story.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's what's, we're 7 days into these rehearsals, and they've created a really incredible amount of music. They've done a lot of cover songs. They've worked through a lot of things, and dynamics inside the group now are really starting to become clearer as we get to see them working more and more. And we see them unite against external things like politics and nationalism. and they're energized and they sound like a band. And then we also see when the pressure comes from inside the system, the business or the hierarchy in the band. That's when we get to see the cracks kind of show. And it was an interesting half hour to see that unfold, where it's almost like they start out strong and then they start falling into those familiar patterns. And, after watching this stretch with the politics and business side showing up and George kind of lingering on the edge of the songwriting, was there anything else that stood out most to you from this half hour?
Where Paul, he is telling George, like, hey, we've done those chords before. Let's do something different. He says some chords, they're like fashion. They can go out of style, which I thought was funny because they're doing so many things calling back to another era. But that's where I feel like George was like, okay, my input isn't needed. Paul is just working with John, not talking to me. I feel left out. I quit the band.
Yeah. That's there. It's crazy to see how much control Paul was really pushing there, and just the different philosophies almost that they've created as their time together has gone on how to write songs.
Yeah. Because I just listened to today. I was doing a lot of driving around, and I listened to Beatles for Sale, and there's covers on there, and all the like original stuff. It was mostly John driven, so it's like pre Sgt. Pepper's. It's like John band, and then post that we started getting like Paul and start now to assert himself, and you see that here. Mm-hmm. So, hey, we're at our 30 minutes. You got any last words in your notes?
No. I think we covered this half hour pretty good. I think we got everything, and I think we're ready to push through and finish this part one up next week. Yeah.
So, shout outs to Susie Parker and sweet Loretta Marsh.
And and as always, if you have questions or comments or corrections, or maybe you just want to rant against authority for a little while, like the Beatles, drop us a line at 30getback@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Beatles forever, right?
Yeah. Get what are they? The Apple Scruffs? Get going, Apple Scruffs.
Apple Scruffs.
Right.
Come on. The Fantastic Four. Here we go. The four-headed monster.
All right. Thanks a lot, AJ. I had a good time tonight.
Me too.